My name is Len Pratt, and I live at 301 Wildwood Avenue in Birchwood. I'd like to look back at that screen that has the seepage meters on it.
Oh. This one?
It was seepage meters, and they were numbered.
Okay.
You had them numbered.
Right here?
Yeah. And it's somewhat in the question that George had asked earlier. If you look at it, all of the metering that went on, numbers 1 and 2, were the ones that showed the most outflow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as I think about that project, you know, and the pipe that went down, the question still remains, you know, is it getting out of there?
Well, and there is, but the one thing we did see is that there isn't a flow that's heading towards Bald Eagle Lake from our regional standpoint. But we didn't see as far as the amount of flow coming out.
But if it's following the pipe, like a French drain,
mm-hmm.
in theory, it wouldn't be heading over to Bald Eagle necessarily. It may be following the pipe.
That's true, because the pipe heads down in that direction.
There you go. In other words, it may be not heading to Bald Eagle. It may be heading south along the pipe to somewhere else. So if you keep that thought in mind,
mm-hmm.
your mention of the fact, well, there's other lakes. If we go back to that slide that showed also a higher rate of dropping recently, you know, higher rate of lake levels dropping. And you mentioned South Center Lake, and I couldn't write fast enough, but
sure.
Are these slides available to the public?
We are planning, what we have to do is I made changes. Well,
okay.
Jared and I made changes to these slides just today. We have to go through, unfortunately, a review process. But then what
okay.
we're planning to do is we're going to do through that, and then we're going to make the slides publicly available on our website.
Okay. Because I may be a bit off on my question, but if I could go to that one map that you had comparing White Bear Lake and the other lakes in the area that also included that South Center Lake. That was one of the other lakes that was lower than others, along with White Bear. Yeah.
There.
Okay, the red ones. I'm sorry. Now, you mentioned that if, for instance, there were leaks in the lake that were caused by, say, such as a project on 61 or others, let's just say there may be others, I'm not sure, that's somewhat dissuaded by the fact that there are other lakes in our area that are low, like White Bear.
Yeah.
But they may have stories, too, of seepage that's beyond what I'll call natural cause.
Mm-hmm.
Because if all these lakes in this aquifer were down at seepage at the same level, then that would somewhat say, well, we're all affected by the same thing. My question is, since we're the ones that are red there, not all of them are, maybe those other lakes that are red have other kinds of what I'll call ancillary reasons besides just aquifer drop. See?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
My final thought to kind of tie this together, you know, we had rain in 11. And the rapid drop that's occurred, you know, third quarter of 11, that's that one slide there. If you can kind of follow with me here.
Yeah. Well, you can see it here.
Yep. That's a rapid drop. That would say that there's something else besides evaporation going on here.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? And if it's going back down through these various places to the aquifer, is that the only reason, or are there other ancillary reasons? I'm trying to come up with some kind of a solution to plug some of the leak, is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not totally convinced that it's just going back in the aquifer at the bottom of the lake.
Well, I think from your standpoint of, yes, there could be other small projects that could be going around this lake.
Yep.
These were just example cases I showed.
Mm-hmm.
When I looked through, I said, when I revisited these slides, because this was a slide I made about a year ago, and I revisited those lake levels, I could come up with 10 other lakes that probably have the same issue.
Okay.
And so how many more do you need to look at as far as specific projects that may be causing the problem?
I was just focusing on what I saw here tonight.
Sure, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand.
I saw red, and I saw others that weren't red, and I saw a rapid drop here this fall down to what you said, within half a foot of our lowest level ever, and yet we were up 1.5 feet. So we've dropped a foot, and it's leaking somewhere.
Right.
Okay.
And that's where I'm coming from. I think we're seeing, when we looked at the pumpage and we did this analysis, we basically found that a likely explanation is the pumping that's occurring in this area, and that you've got a large head difference to look at, and what may be taking.
My sense is that's the major issue that needs to be studied, and maybe once again, maybe some of these wells that are drawing the most can be set at another level, another aquifer maybe, or whatever that is, or limiting pumping or whatever during times, and I'm not sure all the strategies about municipal wells and what we might do to take the pressure off of it. But I wanted to make absolutely certain there wasn't some other ancillary things that we could do to help. I think it's going to take a combination of things maybe.
I totally agree with you. I think it's going to come down to that, can we come up with maybe improved pumping scenarios that will help the lakes, but at the same time, I think we have to look at, other aspects.
And then as you look at all of them, just double check that pipe.
All right. I'll check the pipe.
Thank you.
I'll have to say, when we were involved in this study, we talked with a lot of people, and I really appreciate your help, because you came up with a lot of good information that we just didn't know. You've lived in this area for a long time, and everyone had a different opinion what could be, and we tried to investigate as much as possible as what we could look at, and we didn't see the seepage coming out of there, and we just, by looking at all the data, we just didn't think that was the most important thing. Okay.
Well, that would be the question.
Thank you.
If you got the Prairie du Chien goes all the way down through Iowa, I mean, where do you start controlling the pumping? I mean, it's not just White Bear Lake.
Yeah, that's true.
It's
You
a
could go all the way
multi-state
down.
situation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, ma'am.
I just have a question. My
you
name is
please-
Marlene Rink, by the way. I live on Turtle Lake, which is having the same problem, and we've had a number of homeowner association meetings discussing the same thing. We were waiting anxiously for this White Bear study to be done so that we could get, some information about that before we might go on with something along the lines of a study. Because we are so close to along Lexington, and I'm not good at directions, but I believe we're west of White Bear, and the arms plant is west of us. I can't help but think that what they've been doing over there for the last, I don't know how many number of years, to clean that place out. Because I drive down Lexington Avenue, and the little cattail swamp that had about this much water showing in it for years and years and years, all of a sudden has this much water showing in it. It's a lake now. I mean, it's a small lake, but it's a lake. When we were at one of our meetings, I don't know if it was you or somebody else from the USGS said, well, we don't have data on what they're pumping through there. Do you have that, and can that be accessed? Because if you're talking about this sewer pipeline, and then you're talking about what the government has been doing to clean that soil in the arms plant, there's got to be, tons of water that's being pumped through there, simply because the size of that little reservoir in the cattail swamp has grown so much. Are they pumping out of the same aquifer that that, all this other municipal pumping is coming from?
No, that's, it's a shallow aquifer they're pumping from because it's a shallow contamination issue. So that's in like the glacial material. When we're talking about that deeper aquifer that's pumping, that's a
Okay.
bedrock one that's lower. But Turtle Lake, and this is another issue that I didn't present here today, but it's something that's significant. If you look at why we have the deep sections through here in White Bear Lake, there's actually what are called buried valleys that go through there. And it's basically areas where you've got a deep incision into the bedrock. And right through this area, this is where the Prairie du Chien is the shallowest bedrock there. If you look at Turtle Lake, there's another buried valley that goes right through Turtle Lake. And then the Prairie du Chien becomes the shallowest bedrock through here. And so and I haven't looked at all the systems, but there may be a correlation to the fact that you've got these buried valley systems that run through these systems that may be causing some of the issues too, because then you've got the Prairie du Chien, which again is a karst bedrock that could be causing some of the issues. Now I know over at the Arsenal they're pumping from shallow, and I believe, and I'm not sure about this, but I think they're treating the water, and then some of that water gets discharged to some of the wetlands over there. And so
Right.
I'm not sure if the wetland you're talking about is one that they discharge to, but it could be, and that's why the water level may be up in those
Well,
wells.
it must be because the water level has really come up in that
Yeah.
in that one area, and I think that's probably one of the deepest wetland areas in the whole area there.
And the Department of Natural Resources, they have the state's water use database. And so if they're pumping, now they have to be high capacity pumping wells. I don't know, Jeanette, what's the rate they have to be for high capacity wells? I always forget. To be listed. Yeah, and I don't know if they pump that much, but they do have a permit. So they have a permit those pumping rates should be available.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, my name's Mike Downing with White Bear Township, and Perry, we'd like to thank you for a great job. We owe you a special thanks for doing some great science, and we appreciate your presentation.
Well, thank you.
I'm not a scientist, so I'm an engineer, and engineers look at information and try to solve problems. Many of us in this room are not scientists. We may be problem solvers. And if you could put your engineer's hat on and speculate.
I'm a geologist, so that might be kind of hard. I don't know.
Speculate for a moment.
Yeah.
If this were your lake, and you're a homeowner or a boater or a fisherman that really want to save our lake, rather than being the White Bear Lake become White Bear Marsh or whatever, so that we can change White Bear Lake back to the way it was before. There are a variety of, you can speculate with solutions, and you can make assumptions. And with those assumptions, say, this is what I would do, this is what I would do, and this is what I would do. And you can test the hypothesis. The June, July, and August high usage, we could double the rate of the price per water, cubic foot of water. Or we could build a reservoir to minimize the June, July, August depletion. What are some of the things that you would, besides pumping from Mississippi River over to fill the lake back up, what are the things that you would do? Because you're the resident expert in this room, not us. If you were to issue not some scientific recommendations of other studies, what would you do to solve the problem?
Well, I think it's going to take a team. I don't think you can do this on your own. There's people who regulate the water use in this area. It's got to involve people from the state, as well as in the cities, as well as the local communities. I think you need to look at how the water is being pumped currently and seeing if there's a better way of managing the pumping that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I think also conservation has to be looked at to
Yes.
some extent.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'll help. I think if we pray for rain, That'll help. Because, no, I'm serious, because from the standpoint, we could be here next year and we could have a lot of rain, water level might pop right back up, and they'll say, Jones, why did we get that Jones to look at this? All we needed was rain, you know? But I think the thing is, though, down the road, there's going to be a period of time, and you know how Mother Nature works. There's going to be a dry period, and the question is, how low are the lakes going to get then? If we don't look at how we're using water and how we can better management and look at those situations. Because there may be certain wells that, if you look at scenarios, there may be certain wells that may be having more of an impact on the lake levels than others. And
along that line,
you can look at those scenarios.
You could test the hypothesis of shutting down those 2 wells that are south of us. I know I'm in the township, and those are the wells that feed our house. But what would the impact be of using other wells rather than those 2 wells? You know, I don't know if there would have any impact, but you can model it, and you can determine, you know, would it have any impact on the lake level?
Well, and I think you have to look by lake basis. Maybe there's certain wells that are affecting certain lakes more than others, and so there might be, overall, I think you still have to look maybe at trying to reduce the pumping rates, and that's something to look at.
If I were sitting on the Conservation Board, I would be charging you with, you know, that speculation, asking the question of what are the things that we ought to be doing. You raised a few tonight. Keep thinking along those lines of what we should be testing and what the cities, townships, and surrounding communities should be doing to minimize the negative impact on our lake level. But thank you again for an excellent presentation.
Yep. You know, the other thing I want to make a point is that some of these wells to the south where we're seeing lake water, some of that's a natural process. We're not seeing it. It's not just because the pumping's happening. It's a natural flow. We can see that in some of the flow patterns we're seeing. So,
Perry, Brian McGoldrick, Docks of White Bear Lake. I too want to thank you for what you're doing, but also the Lake Conservation District Board. I know they've probably worked twice as hard as they have in the last couple of years as they do normally, and there's also, you know, a lot of property owners and business owners like myself that it hasn't been a fun last few years. The question that I have for you is that you either stated or I read that in 2002 the precipitation levels and the lake levels deviated from what had traditionally been normal over 30 years. Is that correct?
yeah, we noticed a change after 2003 when we saw the lake level dropping. Now, the other thing we didn't point out, which is our fault, but the late 1990s and the early 2000s, we had a lot of rain in some of those years. And so even though we say the change happened in 2003, it could have happened earlier than that. But the problem is when you had so much rain, it kind of masked that whole process. And so some of the things we may be seeing may have happened earlier.
So the question I have for you then, Perry, is it reasonable to conclude that the ordinary high water mark that was established back in 1934 is no longer accurate?
Talk to the DNR. I think they are involved.
They don't want to talk to me, Perry. Thank you.
You always come up with the good ones, Brian, I tell you.
Thank you again.
He's just worried about deck space. Dock space.
I'm David Brown. I'm a longtime resident in Montemita. And I'd like to thank you for an excellent presentation. And it's good to see some hard data that we can work off of. And I think you've done a nice job presenting it.
Thank you.
So we certainly appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important that we have a couple things to take away. And I take away with this issue the relationship of the rain, but the flow of the water from the east through the lake and the different topographical elements relating to the lake. And obviously we're not going to blast those out of there. But we do, I think, walk away here as a layman knowing that there's something going on with the pumping. And it would be pretty interesting, I think, to see the relationship of this pumping as a function of time. I mean, we're looking at today's pumping. We're not looking at yesterday's pumping or 2000 pumping in 2000 or 1990. I think we would pick up some pretty valuable data on that.
Yeah, and we've looked at historical records of pumping and how it's changing. It's pretty obvious what's going on there. But one thing that Jared pointed out in his last slide is that if we take that new relationship that we've developed for the lake from 2003 to 2011 and we apply the pumping conditions, let's go back in time. Take the average from 1980 to 2002, take those average pumping conditions, apply to that new relationship, we get the water levels to come back up. And so to that, it made us believe that at least it's a very likely, or I wouldn't say likely, but it's a good explanation for what may be going on is the increase in the pumping.
So this strengthens your ability to produce some hypothesis to move forward on some of your technical work, I would think.
I think we can. We have to write up the, we have to get this report completed, finished up, but we're this close, so we're getting there.
Okay, well then in the meantime, I guess most of the residents here in White Bear and Montemita will have to work on a rain dance.
We're working on a what? I'm
A
sorry.
rain dance.
Oh yeah, the rain dance. Yes. You know, I live in Vadnais Heights, so I'll keep my kids going on the rain dance, and then I'll keep
thank you.
helping out too.
My name is Lloyd Keppel, 67 Tamarack, Matamidi. Thank you also for the fine report. Most interesting conclusions. My question relates to this municipal pumping. Presumably, we're seeing increased pumping rates elsewhere in the metro too, and we all have friends in the Metro West who sort of smugly ask us about how our lake is doing, you know, which
Yes.
I'm getting tired of hearing. Is there something unique to the geology around White Bear Lake that causes this, whereas we're not seeing it in other lakes, which presumably have high pumping rates too, say in the Metro West, for example, Lake Minnetonka?
That's a very good question. I mean, if you look, some of the reasons why is that the Prairie du Chien Aquifer and the Jordan Aquifer is shallow here. We've talked about that before. The other thing is, when you look at that, you have the glacial sands, which are glacial tills, which are, sometimes you have sand that can be permeable, but then you have till areas which are not so permeable. But you have the sandstone, which is an aquifer, so that's permeable, and then you have the Prairie du Chien and Jordan. Well, in some places in the metro area, you have layers above those in the bedrock that ones like the Decorah Shale, some of the shale units that are above that. And those shale units, for the most part, not in all cases, but for the most part, they can be fairly consistent and they won't allow water to go down past those deeper aquifers. And so it's harder for, when you have pumping in that deeper aquifer, if you got a layer in between that's less permeable, it's harder for that interaction to occur. And I think that may be happening in some areas, so you don't see lakes that are being impacted as much.
Thank you.
And can I ask you one more dumb question here?
And there's never a dumb one. Go ahead.
Is there water down there somewhere that's not being accessed, that's not being used, that is just there? Or is all of this connected to the point where it's all one basin in an aspect? I'm just curious, because if there's water down there somewhere that isn't touched or is untouchable or is a resource that's untapped, is that down there or is it not?
Well, there are deeper aquifers down below. There's the Franconian Ironton Galesville aquifer. That's not as good a source of water as, in general, it's not as good a source of water as the Prairie du Chien Jordan aquifer. There's also the Mount Simon aquifer, which is down deeper. And actually, they're the wells that were used to augment or provide water to the lake previously. Some of those were down into that Mount Simon aquifer.
And you believe that it was a cycle, that we pumped it out of those aquifers and it just went back down in them?
Yeah, and what happens is it's a cycle, but it's also from the standpoint, when you have the lake level down, remember Jared pointed out that the groundwater levels and the lake levels kind of mimic each other.
And I saw
up.
that, yes.
And so when you have to look at augmenting the lake, you can't just look at the surface area of the lake. You got to bring up the aquifers around it as much. So it's a
I agree,
big
yes.
area.
It's huge. Okay,
It's a
thank you.
huge area, yep.
Any further questions? Go ahead, Mr. Glena.
Phil Watkins. I grew up on South Shore Boulevard, now live in Hugo. One of the evil cities pumping the water, I guess. But Yeah, but hey, one question I had is, are these, let's say, lakes that are having this problem only on the Northeast Metro, or, I mean, do we have this on other areas of the metro area?
You know, I don't know. I haven't looked in that much detail, but I know that in the Northeast, but you go over to Turtle Lake, I don't know if you consider that Northeast, but it's having impacts. I haven't really looked further off from there. They could be.
Well, I guess one question I was going to have, and this is mainly on precipitation in our hope of the rain event that's going to fill it up or whatever, but I guess I've watched a lot of weather and been a pilot myself and kind of got into it a little bit and got real curious about it. And I've noticed that, you know, the weather pretty much always moves southwest to northeast. And we have this ever-growing gargantuan heat island effect of the metro area. And if you watch summer rains, they'll come and hit the metro area and just dry up by the time they get to us. You know, I know when my lawn's real dry and I'm hoping, you know, oh boy, you know, and then it just doesn't happen. And we keep getting mists, and I don't know if we've ever had a precipitation measurement comparing, you know, this end of the metro area to the southwest, but it seems when I've done it just real quick looking on the websites for the Weather Service, I've noticed quite a difference. And just kind of wondering if that's been played at all as far as, you know, what we can, you know, if we are going to hope for, let's say, normal rain moving forward in time, that's one thing that may have an effect on it over the long term.
Yeah, we didn't look into anything like that. I think it's a better question for the state climatology office. They've probably looked at that issue to some extent, but no, we haven't looked at whether that may be as far as reducing rainfall amounts.
All right, and this is a kind of far out there one, but I've noticed, you know, over many years, like a lot of other people have, the weeds obviously have increased greatly in the lake. Does that increase the precipitation or the evaporation effect at all?
It can. The milfoil is pretty deep, and so some of those probably aren't an issue. But if you have as far as along the shoreline, yeah, if you have more plant activity, you have more uptake of water and transpiration that could result. Now, the other thing you got to consider is that your lake area, as it goes down and becomes smaller, the evaporation right off the lake is reducing. So it's kind of a combination of both, and it's a trade-off of both.
Sure. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Perry, over the last number of years, probably about 2003, most of the cities around the lake have implemented runoff plans that specifically are diverting water from the lake. And I know it's been kind of a trade-off of the water quality has gone up, but because of the watershed is so small, are we harming ourselves by diverting that and changing that into groundwater versus having that burst into the lake?
Are we talking from a standpoint of water quality or water level?
You forget about water quality at
Okay.
this point. I'm just
Okay.
talking about volume. You know, the city of White Bear is taking and diverting all of their snow removal to the other side of the hump, if you will, so it's not coming into the lake. A lot of the holding ponds that, you know, are draining, seeping, and if we're not getting that water once it's seeped into the aquifer, are we cheating ourselves by not doing some other type of surface filtering and getting that first squirt of water because of the size of the watershed? It is so small.
Well, it is. The watershed is small, and I think a lot of those things you do eventually get a lot of that water. If it's seeping into the ground system, it's likely flowing into the lake.
It's not flowing into the lake as well.
In the glacial materials, it's flowing in from the east and then the south. It's coming into the system, and so we are finding points.
Not at a volume equal to what it used to because they're being depleted by the wells. Am I not following something right?
Well, that's the glacial material. We're looking at the depletion as far as the water levels and where the water is being extracted from. That's in the deeper aquifer.
Okay.
And a lot of those projects, the surface water projects, you got a picture, that's up in the upper portions in the glacial material.
So it's your opinion that that's not hurting our volume?
I don't think it's having a major impact. And we've talked with people with the Rice Creek watershed district and others. A lot of the projects haven't changed that much. And again, how many projects have actually changed since 2003? Looking at the watershed, it didn't seem like there were that many, as far as when you take into account the whole lake watershed.
Mr. Chairman, Board, and Mr. Cantrud, I'm Richard Galena. I'm a attorney and a longtime resident and businessman in the White Bear Lake area. Perry, thank you so much for your excellent presentation. And maybe you've covered this before, but I do have just a couple questions and then a few comments, if I could. The first thing you talked about was the higher rate of pumping. And you were basically talking between 2003 and 2011. Has a study been done as to what is driving this higher rate of pumping?
Well, actually, we looked from 1980 onward, and that's when we saw the increase. Some of the communities up north have grown, and I think we've just grown in size as far as the community. Now, we didn't specifically look at water usage per capacity, per person, and stuff like that. That may be the next part of this study, is looking at water consumption on that level and seeing, are we seeing on that level an increase in the capacity?
Okay, so that was kind of a follow-up to my next question was, is the rate because of more wells or more usage of existing wells, or a combination of the both?
I think it's a combination of both. There's some new wells going in, but there's a lot of wells that have been there for a long period of time. And so I think it's a combination of both.
Okay. And when we're talking about wells, we're basically talking about domestic wells and then municipal wells, is that?
Well, the pumping we were looking at, what we have pumping records were solely based on what we saw with the high capacity wells, which tended to be the municipal wells, irrigation wells, commercial wells, where they exceed a certain amount of pumping. And where the domestic wells, we did not take that into account. But typically domestic wells, they may have a 5 gallon per minute pump, maybe larger. But they typically don't account for a lot of the flow that's coming out of the systems.
All right. I'm really glad you cleared that up. So we really can't blame this on a resident who has a well for his house to get the drinking water, I take it then. That's not what your study was talking about,
No.
Is that right?
No,
Okay.
we used a lot of the residential wells. They allowed us to take water level measurements. And the other thing with the residential wells, a large municipality could use, a lot of them focus on the Prairie du Chien Jordan Africa because it's got a large amount of flow and a lot of water availability. But a lot of the domestic, they don't need as much wells. And so you'll see a lot of them in the glacial material. They'll screen and take water from that. Some will take it from the St. Peter sandstone. Some will even go down to the Prairie du Chien. And so even if we looked at each individual well, they take water from different aquifer systems, whereas municipalities tend to take the water from that Prairie du Chien Jordan aquifer.
Okay. So if we want to conduct some sort of a study about these municipal wells, then I take it we would have to get the consent of each municipality concerning this. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So how does this board, the Conservation Board, which only has authority over White Bear Lake, have any authority to have a city do anything at all concerning their water pumping and or their wells?
Well, and I think we mentioned this in this whole study. We had a lot of cooperation from all the cities. All the cities helped us out quite a bit. We had, a lot of them were partners in this study. And so I kind of view this as, this is a group effort. And to say this board is gonna force the various cities to cooperate, I think it's gonna be an issue where the cities are gonna want to be involved in this.
Okay, so So, but someone has to put together some sort of a plan. I would take it, and that plan would have to be presented to the cities, and the cities would have to agree on the plan. And so, who is that entity which is going to put together this master plan
Well, and
to
I
take
think
care
what-
of this?
I think what we were working with is, this is where our last slide, when we talked about working with the DNR, working with the Department of Health, working with the MPCA, and we would like to be involved in that, also assisting. But at the same time, we obviously need the cooperation with the cities and trying to come up with the best plan as far as addressing the issue and coming up with the best plan to
Okay.
solve the
So,
problem.
so would you start with some sort of a forum among cities, get them together in a joint meeting of some sort? Is that one of the possibilities?
I think it's how this study started. We got a group I guess it was last February, got them together. We presented a plan that we came up with, and we got various input on that plan, and then we were able to get communities to sign off on that.
That's great.
Yep.
Great. What will we do for funding to do this?
Well, there's various opportunities. There's the legacy funding for the state. That's a potential we could look at. There are grants now that are going to become available through the LCCMR, Legislative Citizens Committee on Minnesota Resources, where we could put together a group to submit a proposal to take on an action plan and seeing if they're willing to provide funds to that.
You know, I really like that word, action plan. I think that's pretty great. When can one start on that?
I have to work on a few other projects, but you know, I think this is something we've thought about this, and I think the organizations I've talked about, we need to get together, form up a plan, and try to get we can't have everyone involved, obviously, as initial planning, but if we get a group of maybe cities and the state organizations get together, come up with a plan we can all agree upon it, and then propose that. I think that's where we could go.
Okay. Now, just one more question, you know, and I don't mean this to be a deposition or anything like that, but when you're using the word we, like we can do this, we can do that, who are we really referring to, like when you say that word?
Well, I kind of look at this study. Who was involved in this study? We had cities, we had the county, we had the state, we had the federal government, us. We had local residents helping out.
Local communities.
Local
all the-
communities.
I mean,
Watershed organizations.
Okay.
I mean, this is our water. It's not. any
Right. In your
particular water.
organization can kind of spearhead all this. Is that?
Well, you know, I don't know if we're the, you know, we can be involved in that group, but whether we're the ones that spearhead that or another organization, I think that's something we all need to sit down together and decide what needs to be accomplished. Does the USGS have a role in that plan? Maybe not, maybe so. I'd like to hope we do. I'd like to get involved in that.
I think you should. I think it'd be great. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's open to that, and I think we can have discussions on that. But I think it comes down to, let's come up with the best plan possible first, and then see who can fill in those roles to address the issue.
Okay. And what would you recommend to the conservation district to do? The first thing here, like after they get your data, look at it at their next board meeting. What do you think their next step should be concerning all this?
Well,
As a recommendation only, of course.
I think the recommendation is we've presented the data we came up with. I think we need to have state organizations and the community organizations, the ones we've had involved, come in and come up with a plan. And I think we can have a group meeting that discusses issues and which ones, there may be issues that are better off tackled by cities. There may be issues that maybe the state the USGS or other organizations should be involved in that component. And I think from maybe a meeting of the minds and seeing which components need to be taken care of, we can come up with a plan.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I'm John Waller. I live in Hugo. White Bear Lake, you said, has a shallow watershed to it, or a small one. How much surface water area would you need to increase, geographical area to increase the watershed into White Bear Lake in order to make it come up the 4 feet you're down?
I don't know. We haven't looked at that.
Oh,
That could be something, but to increase the watershed, you got to take the watershed from somewhere else.
I realize that, but
Yeah.
you take, for example, Ramsey County ditch number 1, Washington County ditch number 1, which comes out of Schumann Marsh and the east side of Washington County and Grant and south part of Hugo. That feeds directly into Bald Eagle Lake as it is now. And it's fairly close. But White Bear Lake outlets into Bald Eagle, so the diversion would be just kind of a long way around.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other issue is that, there's always a trade-off when you do things like that and ditching off. And one trade-off is the water quality. And Bald Eagle has issues with water quality because they get so much surface runoff coming into those ditches and providing into that system. And people have said, if you look over here at Goose Lake, and you can just go over to Kowalski's, you can see the head difference between Goose Lake and White Bear. And someone says, geez, why don't we just put a ditch right through there? Well, go there in July and August in Goose Lake and see what you think about that. The water quality is pretty poor. And so, it's a trade-off, but it is. It's a water quality versus water quantity trade-off, and you have to consider those.
I don't disagree that there's a water quality issue in Bald Eagle. 40% of it is internally phosphorus issue. 30% comes from the immediate residents around it, and approximately 30% comes from the Ramsey County ditch number 1. How much of that water quality or phosphorus issue actually comes from the residents that are, say, from Portland Avenue West to Highway 61 in Buffalo, versus how much of it comes from the more rural area where you don't have as high a concentration? I don't believe it's been determined. But the point being is, when you do get into the more rural areas, the water quality is much higher. And there are methods in order to deal with those water quality issues that, while may be expensive, there are some that aren't so expensive. But that's why I want to know is just how much geographical area do you need. And
I don't know.
The issue about water quality and versus volume, there's an opportunity there to look at the volume that's coming off of that watershed that's to the northeast of White Bear Lake and maybe diverting it. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the chance to speak. Perry, thank you very much. My name is Fletcher Driscoll. I'm a hydrogeologist and in the same business that you are.
Yes.
and tonight, there's a lot of gloom and doom. My family and I moved here in 1937 to White Bear and have been on the lake most of the time since. And somebody asked earlier tonight about other lakes. Minnetonka had a tremendous overflow problem last year. Many yards were underwater. Now, they, of course, have a massive watershed, and unfortunately paid a penalty in water quality, as we well know. So not every lake is in bad shape. Ours is obviously under stress. But when we moved here in 1937, after the big drought of the 30s, the lake was just about the same level as it is now, more or less. And there was a lot of gloom and doom at the same time. My grandfather said, let's bring water in from Lake Superior. And, and I looked at it as an 8 or 9 year old kid and said, I don't think that's possible. We're too far away. But we were patient. And in the early 40s, about 1940, everything changed. And by 1943, the lake reached an all-time high. So it went from where it is today to an all-time high of 943. And that's when they put in the overflow to Bald Eagle, because Cottage Park was actually underwater at that time. So I just want to leave the message that the lake can recover very quickly. It's still under stress, obviously with municipal pumping increase, but even this last year, as Perry has shown, the rainfall was just average, actually the lake popped up pretty fast.
Well, July was a little high, but you're right. I mean, the lake will, if we get enough rain, it'll pop right back up. But I also caution that, you know, we still have a stress system. And if we continue to just ignore that issue, you know, it may come down the way when we have a drier period. It might be more severe than what we have now.
That's exactly right. And having been in the water industry for 40 years or so, when you put on meters in people's houses and you start to charge for increasing uses of water, it's amazing how much water doesn't get used. So I will leave you with that message. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any further questions? All right, thank you.
Hi, I'm Josh Dwoznik. I live just south of the lake. To the slide where I believe you used the isotopes to, I think, measure the water that flowed basically into the lake and then out of the lake.
Yes. Sorry, sing along.
There's a big map with the circles with the two colors.
These?
Yeah.
Okay.
And especially, I think, the next slide where you show the flow of the aquifer into the lake. Yeah, like
Yes.
those. So when you're seeing like the lake water in the aquifer at that point, wouldn't there just be a natural presence of lake water that's sort of downstream from that natural flow?
Yeah, but you have to picture this. Now, I'll caution you. These are, and it's easy to misinterpret this, but these are gradient lines within that lower Prairie du Chien Jordan aquifer. So this water actually isn't entering into the lake. It's flowing under the lake. So you can see it in this cross section maybe a little better. See, when we took those contours, that's within this unit down here, okay? So the glacial aquifer is coming in and discharging in here, but this system's flowing right through. And what we're seeing is that in these wells, which only take water from these aquifers, we're seeing the signature of the lake, or at least a portion of that water seems to indicate that it's lake water coming in there. The other stuff is probably this groundwater that flows through the system. It mixes with the lake water and then comes through and gets intercepted by the well and then taken out.
So is that lake water not supposed to be there? Is that too deep? Why, if there's a like a permeable soil or something like that, why wouldn't you naturally see the lake water present there?
Well,
anyway?
what you could have here, why isn't the water just flowing right out through to some extent? You've got glacial material in here. Some of it's nice sands, so they're nice and permeable, and so the water can flow through it either. Others are tight tills, and so it could go through and kind of stair-step it way down and through this system. And this process is likely a natural process that's occurring. But the issue is that when you pump the system and stress the system, you may be actually increasing how much is coming in. So
you're in a sense pumping the lake water out of it, so it can't come
basically
back
what you're doing is you're mixing in the water, it comes through, and you're pumping out a portion of the lake water coming through. And that's what we think is happening.
Okay.
Yep.
Are you seeing? I was going to ask if you're seeing like a greater like dispersion of the lake water than in the groundwater.
Oh, you mean, yeah. Do
Kind
we
of
see
away
it
from the lake?
down gradient from that? Well, unfortunately, we have 5 wells we looked at. This was, well, I'll tell you what really happened. We sampled this well right here in September. And then I got the results back in November. Then I said, if we want to check what really may be happening, let's go sample these wells. And that's what we did. We sampled these in November, and those are the results we got. And so then our budget ran out. I would have liked to go around and sample all these wells, you know. And, you know, just because we have, again, just because we see, like for instance, these wells here, just because we see lake water doesn't mean that the pumping is causing the lake water to come down and go into these wells, because actually when you compare the pumping rates for these wells, they're much smaller than a lot of the other wells that are further down. So.
But that water should naturally be there. It's just being pumped now, right? right?
Well, it's being pumped, it's getting into the aquifer and going down there, and maybe some of it's there naturally, but some of it may be because there's more pumping regionally, maybe that's increasing.
Creating a seep.
Yeah, it's creating the head difference. See, what drives the flow is the type of material that's in between. In other words, do you have tight material or fairly permeable material? And you have the head difference, which is a reflection of that. And so just the fact that, you could have, if this head difference changes because you're pumping more water out, that may increase the amount of water that's flowing out at the bottom.
Do you know if other studies have been done in the past that kind of compare the, I suppose, lake water presence in the groundwater?
I did
compare like where they're at now versus.
Well, I've done work. For instance, I did some work with the Grand Portage Indian Reservation tribe, and we looking at taking water samples along a lake to figure out where the groundwater is flowing into lakes, and several of their lakes. And we did, I think, a decent job of distinguishing that. And we also used the temperature method. We took temperature measurements along there, give us an idea where the groundwater is coming in, and then where we thought the capture zone for that area is that's contributing to the lakes. There's been other studies, a variety of different studies that have been looking at these issues. I don't know if too many that have looked into the deeper aquifers and used this process, but a lot of times it's more of the shallow glacial material. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
All right, thank you. Is there any further questions? At this time, I'd like to thank Perry dearly for all your hard work.
I could say one thing. I could say one thing too. I'd like to thank Jennifer Bodie. She was a big help. She did a lot of the field work associated with it, and Jared also. And we also had a person who's from this area, Alicia Dykoff, who helped out. You probably met her if you live along the lake. She's done a lot of the work this summer, and so I'd like to thank them for their help.
And that will conclude our presentation with USGS, and I'm going to ask that we take a 15-minute break here before we resume our meeting. Thank you very much for attending the meeting.
How about 10 minutes? 15. What do you mean 15? 10 minutes. 5 minutes.